Interlude. An adventurer quite meddling with other adventurers. Damn it. My ass hurts. I knew I didn't trust carriages. Me and my friend here have adventured all over this land, and let me tell you, if the gods had wanted adventurers to roll around, they would have given us wheels. Us. We're making a delivery. We do that sometimes. Sometimes someone asks us to. What about you, girls? I mean, an all-female party can have its own challenges. What do you mean, like what? I mean, you can't ride, and once a month, you know. You need to take rests all the THRGK. For. What are you doing? You just cast spider web on a guy all of a sudden. I apologize for my indelicate companion. Yeah. Sorry about, but seriously. A party of 3 girls. You gotta watch out. Not just for monsters and bandits, either. There's some pretty low-down adventurers out there, too. Beginners are yar. They say. Need some help? Well, looks like your adventure went pretty well. We'll just take a little fee for showing you the ropes. And if you can't pay, well, if you're lucky, they'll just take your equipment. But if you're not, you can end up shackled with debt. There have always been more experienced guys who'll take advantage of less experienced ones. It's not as bad as it used to be, though. They used to just beat the crap out of rookies at the bar and then strip bare. That was 20 or 30 years ago, wasn't it? What? Don't want me to scare with stories of the old days. It's fine. A little fear makes you pay attention. We're not all bad eggs, but we're not all good ones, either. I mean, we're all word havers. We all pray just the same, don't we? Sometimes we're gonna argue, we're gonna fight, we're gonna not like each other. That's just how it goes. Oh yeah. Sometimes you see those parties that are, like, all girls except for one guy. Great stuff. If kinda sordid. Personally, I'm not interested, though. I'm all about love, Love's gotta be free. Hey, what'd I say to deserve a glare like that? Anyway, girls, point is, be careful. I've heard there's been some weird stuff going on around this water town lately. And if he's here, that means it's got to involve goblins. Get the biggest sword you like, but if they jump you before you can pull it out, it won't count for nothing. Chapter 8. A moment's rest. Warm sunlight streamed from the sky, and a cool breeze blew off the water. People chattered in a lively marketplace, enjoying themselves. In a place where so many people of different races and creeds gathered, adventurers were hardly an unusual sight. But most adventurers were not a young priestess and a man wearing a steel helm over his head in the middle of town in broad daylight. I'm so glad we got good weather. Yes. Priestess pattered after Goblin Slayer, her lips slightly upturned. She walked gingerly, cradling something carefully in her arms. Want me to hold it? No, I'm fine, she replied with a smile. I see, said Goblin Slayer, nodding as he slackened his pace. Soon his shoulders were level with Priestess's head, and she glanced over at his helmet. The gesture was reminiscent of a puppy enjoying its first walk. Pedestrians looked at them as they walked by, merchants peeked out from their stalls. Priestess opened her mouth to ask him about this but eventually closed it again without saying anything. This was Goblin Slayer. No doubt he was paying none of it any mind. What would their friends think if they could see this? She couldn't imagine. She did know, however, that High Elf Archer, Lizard Priest, and Dwarf Shaman were beneath her feet at that very moment. Okay, Orkbolg. You take it easy, now. We will be less one frontline fighter and one spellcaster. We will not take any undue risks. But I'll tell you what is risky, a warrior with no armor. The 3 adventurers had brought up the idea during a meal. Priestess, who was still not quite feeling her usual self, could only bow her head and apologize. What surprised them, though, was that even Goblin Slayer's response was quite frank. "Thanks. I'll let you handle it." Priestess still couldn't fathom what was in his heart of hearts, but by now she had a fairly good idea of how he thought. The goblins had used that burial chamber as the site for an ambush, meaning it was clearly part of their territory. That meant the adventurers had to search the hidden staircase they had found behind the stone coffin, if for no other reason than that the champion was still alive. That battle had presumably weakened the goblins significantly, but it had taken its toll on the party as well. And time was on the goblin side. The party had a perfectly capable ranger, monk, and magic user, and they couldn't afford to dawdle. In the meantime, the warrior and the priestess would stay behind to rest their minds and bodies and repair their equipment so as to be prepared for the next excursion. There was one problem, however. Perhaps due to the volume of customers, the workshop at the Adventurers Guild here didn't take special orders. When Goblin Slayer had asked for leather armor, a shield, and a sword, he had been refused with a slow shake of the head. At length, he had determined to go out to buy what he needed, and Priestess had said she would go with him. She questioned him insistently, and although he gave clear answers, "I know everyone's worried about you. Are you sure you're okay?" "Yes." "Your injuries are healed?" "Yes." "Your wounds were much worse than mine?" "Yes." "You know not to do anything silly now, right?" "Yes." Priestess puffed out her cheeks and stopped walking. Goblin Slayer went several more steps before he noticed. He stopped and looked back. She only stared at him. He cocked his head, clearly unaware of any problem. "What's wrong?" "Sheesh. What do you mean, what's wrong?" Priestess stuck out her finger straight at him. "I'm angry." She furrowed her eyebrows as hard as she could, but she failed to intimidate. Partly, it was the stares of people around them. They must have thought the two adventurers were having a lover's quarrel, or maybe that they were siblings fighting. Who could say? Passers-by looked suspicious at first, but soon some smiles appeared among them. "Goblin Slayer, sir." "Yes" is the only thing you've said this entire conversation. "Is it?" "It is." "Is it?" "And you say is it a lot, too?" Goblin Slayer crossed his arms and grunted. The pair stood silently, surrounded by the babble of the street. Birds flew lazily by in the blue sky above them while he mulled something over for a time. Finally, he gave a slow nod. "I will change." "Please do," Priestess said and giggled. When an adventurer this serious said he would change, he surely would. They had only known each other a few months, but she knew that much. She set off again at a sprightly pace, and Goblin Slayer soon matched her. Before long, they were walking side by side again, Priestess once more level with his shoulders. Somehow, that in itself made her very happy. "You said something about shopping." "Yes," he replied, then held up his hand as if to say wait. Apparently he had something to add. Another little chuckle escaped Priestess at his unpracticed show of consideration. "I am going to look at some weapons and armor. Mine are damaged." Goblin Slayer's helmet was turned toward her. It hid his face and any expression, but red eyes shone faintly within. "What will you do?" Priestess put one slim finger to her lips and tilted her head. The breeze lifted her hair, blew it back behind her head. She figured the answer to what she was about to say was obvious, but, "Are you actually trying to ask my opinion?" "I believe so." "Gosh." Goblin Slayer seemed to think his reply was quite natural. Priestess sighed. For now she would live and let live. "My chainmail was ruined, too," she answered dutifully, composing her expression. "I thought maybe there'd be somewhere I could get it fixed. It would probably be quicker to buy new." Goblin Slayer's answer was completely stone-faced. He really doesn't get it. Priestess looked up at him with half-closed eyes. "I don't want to." "Why not?" This time it was Goblin Slayer's turn to look perplexed. Priestess clutched the bundle containing her chain mail and murmured, "Because this is the first thing I did that you praised me for." Goblin Slayer stopped and looked at her. Priestess adjusted the bundle in her arms as if to show him a treasure. Shy, she averted her eyes. "You don't remember. You said it was a little rough but would stop a blade." "Did I?" His voice seemed somehow strained, and then he whispered, "I suppose I did." They entered a rather prosperous-looking equipment shop. The clangs of a hammer striking metal came from deep in the store. Weapons and armor were strewn about the dim interior. It had a vitality that was lacking in the guild workshop. While Priestess blinked several times, understandably overwhelmed. It was full of weapons she had never seen, armor she couldn't imagine how to wear, and one curio after another. She noticed one weapon she did recognize in the midst of it all and picked it up gently with a soft breath. "They've even got flails." These consisted of 2 sticks with heavy metal fasteners connected by a chain. They were said to have evolved from a threshing tool. Clergy of the Earth Mother had been known to use them, and Priestess puffed out her little chest proudly at her modicum of knowledge. "Going to buy it?" "No," she scanned the room at Goblin Slayer's blunt question. She lacked the courage to stand in the party's front row, and for personal protection, she had her sounding staff. "I guess not." Priestess carefully returned the flail to its shelf, then started as she noticed a man who appeared to be the shopkeeper. Excuse me." The man eyed her, and Priestess looked to the floor. He was young, maybe about 20, but he had the air of a teenager who had only just grown up. It wasn't that he seemed uncouth. His clothes were neat, his hair and beard well trimmed. But his disinterested answer made him seem oddly cold. "HRM, welcome, welcome. What can I do for you?" "Could you repair this chain mail?" Priestess held out her armor hesitantly, and the shopkeeper gave it a once-over. Then he reached into the hole at the shoulder, spread out the armor, and exhaled. "That's some hole. Don't you think it'd be better to get a new set?" "I'd rather have it repaired." "Repair, sure. Customer's always right." The man's gaze ran along Priestess's slim arms. Unreserved, lewd, he looked her up and down as if drinking her in. "Need a makeover, miss?" "And no thank you." Priestess shook her head, feeling a hot flush in her cheeks. Was this how shopkeepers in the city normally treated their customers? It would have been unthinkable on the frontier, or was he simply making light of her because she was so clearly a novice? The thought pained her. "I need some repairs done, too." It was Goblin Slayer. When Priestess raised her eyes again, they were met with a mail-clad back. Faced with the grimy steel helmet, the shopkeeper let out a strange gurgle. "Silver rank, the shopkeeper's voice quaked. Apparently he had noticed the silver tag hanging around Goblin Slayer's neck. "Why yes, sir." "Repairs?" "Of course, sir. My leather armor and my round shield. Quickly, if you don't mind. Along with that chain mail. Would you like them cleaned? And your shield appears to be missing its grip." "Don't clean them." "And I removed the grip myself." As to payment, sir, including the rush fee." "Don't worry." Without flinching, Goblin Slayer dug in his bag and dropped a leather purse on the counter. It made a heavy thump as it landed and slumped over. Gold coins spilled from the mouth. Thank you, sir. I'll need to have a look at your swords, too." "Oh, I have a mithril blade in at the moment." "I don't need it." His bold, unconcerned stride carried him over to where a variety of swords were mounted on the wall. He took one down with a completely average double-edged blade. It had a long grip, a 1.5-handed sword. If that's the kind of blade you prefer, sir, I have a dwarf forged." "Too long." He shoved the sword back onto the rack, then started going through merchandise until he came up with a small single-edged sword. "Are short swords more to your liking, sir?" "I have an enchanted one found in some ruins." Enchanted. Yes, sir. The shopkeeper's voice went up an octave. It keeps the blade from dulling, of course, but also sounds an alarm when enemies are near. I don't need it. His tone was blunt enough to be a weapon itself. I'll take this one. It's a bit long, but I can grind it down myself. I'll borrow your whetstone while we wait for our repairs. But, sir. With a blade like that, the best you could hope to hunt is goblins. That's what I plan to do. The shopkeeper had nothing to say to that, but Goblin Slayer, as ever, seemed to take no notice. Perhaps he was trying to say to her, "Don't let it get to you." He was a hard one to fathom. Priestess turned faintly red and let out a soft, quiet sigh. Hee. Ar har 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 har. What? Because you, he. As they left the shop after having their repairs done, an afternoon breeze swirled around them. The blue sky shone with the early summer sun, and the babbling of a nearby stream was pleasant to their ears. I know I shouldn't laugh, but... Priestess wiped tears from the corners of her eyes, her laugh as clear as a bell. The flummoxed shopkeeper had tried to say something as Goblin Slayer ground the sword shorter and shorter, but... I'm only going to throw it, it doesn't matter. It's true, isn't it? But the face he made... It was incredible. Was it? Yes, it was. Priestess finally managed between gales of laughter. She presumed this behavior was not becoming for a disciple of the Earth Mother, but it certainly felt good. Her conscience berated her, so she also sent up a little prayer. Just a bit won't hurt anything, will it? Just then, step right up. Delicious, melt in your mouth, ice cream. It's a taste sensation. A voice rang out above the din, along with a jangling handbell. Ice cream. Curiosity brought Priestess to a standstill in front of a cramped stall. Children cheered and rushed across the paved street to give the owner their change. I wonder what that place is selling. From this distance, it was hard to tell, but judging by the children's expressions, it was some kind of sweet. Priestess peeked at Goblin Slayer, who nodded and said, "Go ahead." "Yes, sir." "Thank you." Priestess gave a deep bob of her head, all smiles, then ran off, her hair flowing behind her. She was a little embarrassed to line up with the children, but I'm still only 15 myself. It was just a difference of 2 or 3 years, she told herself. And finally she got one of the sweets for herself. Ice cream turned out to look like melting white ice. It had a bright red cherry on top, perhaps to give it some color. Priestess spooned some of the treat out of its crispy, fried bowl and into her mouth. Wow! Instantly, her cheeks flushed, and a smile blossomed on her face. She turned to Goblin Slayer with a mix of surprise and excitement. "This is amazing. It's cold and sweet. You like it?" "Yes, very much. At the temple, we didn't get to eat many sweet things." She smiled bashfully with a small giggle. "I feel like I'm breaking the rules, just a little." "I see. A nice treat." Goblin Slayer observed the stall with a certain amount of fascination. The ice cream was stored in a well-cooled metal vessel. It would be scooped out and piled in the bowls. As far as he could tell, there was no sign of magic involved. That was to say, the tanned shopkeeper did not appear to be any kind of wizard. "This is no spell. How do you make it?" "Well, I gotta say it's a mystery to me how it works." The shopkeeper didn't seem bothered by the question. He continued to smile as he slid a lid over the vessel. "Some professor discovered that water cools faster if you put some impurities in it." And if you add more of the stuff to the ice, it gets even icier." "I see. Want some chilled wine?" "Easy with this stuff, believe you me, works on fruit, too." So he thought, what if you tried it on cow's milk? And here we are. "I see. Very interesting." He sounded as intrigued as a child who had learned the secret to a magic trick. It was such an unfamiliar tone for him that it caused Priestess to blink several times. Goblin Slayer took a large gold coin out of his pouch and gave it to the shopkeeper. "1, please. Keep the change." "Certainly, sir." The ecstatic shopkeeper scooped out the ice cream with a practiced movement. Goblin Slayer watched him, transfixed. Hee. Goblin Slayer looked back, mystified by the chuckle that escaped Priestess. "What?" "Nothing. I just finally figured out how you came to know so much, sir." "I see. Maybe it would be nice to sit down calmly instead of standing while they ate." At Priestess's suggestion, the two of them settled on a bench along the roadside. They sat side by side, spooning the treat into their mouths and savoring its chill and sweetness on their tongues, watching the crowds go by. When Priestess stole a sideways glance, she found him eating through his visor, as usual. Warm sunlight filtered through the trees. A cool breeze blew across the water. People chattered merrily. Well-dressed men and women passed by, while children dashed about with huge smiles on their faces. Horse-drawn carriages rumbled along the neatly laid flagstones. "It's strange, isn't it?" Priestess whispered, furrowing her brow at the scene. "None of these people have any idea there are goblins right under their feet." "Yes. Some people have been hurt, and I'm sure they're probably afraid of that, but nobody seemed to really care. Not the clerk at the equipment shop. Not the ice cream seller. No one whiling away the hours here." What about her frontier town? She had felt the threat of monsters was real and near, but "When I was little, he murmured. "What?" "There was a time when I thought that if I took a single step, the earth might open up beneath me and I would die." Huh? The spoon went still in Priestess's hand as Goblin Slayer spoke. "I was afraid to walk at all." The cherry tumbled from the top of her melted ice cream and rolled to the bottom. She ignored it and focused on Goblin Slayer's face, even though she could not see his expression behind his helmet. Such a thing is not impossible. But nobody ever worried about it. I found that strange. But he seemed to laugh quietly. My sister laughed at me, and so did she, but it was quite some time before I realized that, scared or not, I had to walk. Is that right?" "That is right." The wind slipped between them, bringing with it a sibilance of leaves. "But even now, I am terribly afraid." Of what and why he did not say. Nor did Priestess consider asking. It had only been a few months since they'd met, but she had been with him constantly all that time. There was no way she could fail to understand. "I appreciate your help," Goblin Slayer said, forcing himself to sound detached and cool, as usual. "But your help is not strictly necessary." Priestess didn't answer. She looked down and swirled her spoon aimlessly in her melted ice cream. Finally, she picked up the cherry and popped it into her mouth. Amid the bittersweet taste was the hard pit. She puffed out her cheeks, affecting a sulk. "You said to do what I liked, didn't you?" "Did I?" "Yes, you did. You really are beyond help." Goblin Slayer looked up at the blue sky, as if unsure whether he should respond to this. Priestess toyed with the stem of the cherry between her lips, paying no regard to etiquette. Finally, she said just one short word. "Sorry." "I don't want to hear that." "Sorry. Not that I really care. I mean, there are things that scare me, too," she whispered. Whether the words reached his ears or not, she wasn't sure. "That's cold." A drop of the melted ice cream dribbled onto her hand, provoking her surprised exclamation. She looked awkwardly at Goblin Slayer and wiped the drop away with a handkerchief. The crispy treat that served as a bowl had completely soaked through. HRK. She stuffed the rest of the dessert into her mouth, and the chill gave her a headache. She discreetly wiped away the tears that jumped to her eyes, pretending they weren't there. Then she rose. "Okay. Shall we go now, Goblin Slayer?" Sigh. "Goblin Slayer. There you are." Priestess stopped dead. She was sure she recognized that spirited voice, but she certainly hadn't expected to hear it here. She looked up to see a tough-looking adventurer in blue armor, carrying a spear. It was Spearman. What's the big idea, summoning a guy by letter? I'm telling on you to Guild Girl. Telling her what? That you and this girl were having a little date. We're shopping. Goblin Slayer brushed past Spearman, who had come on full force just as he did at home. Nearby, Priestess turned slightly red and hurried to straighten up, although there was no point. He. Which was all well-formed limbs, and she stuck to Spearman as closely as a shadow. Her eyes played over Priestess, then closed a little, alluringly. Priestess found herself swallowing heavily. You seem well. That's good. Yes. Priestess hurriedly got up from the bench and bowed her head, then reached up to straighten her cap. She found which a very impressive woman and was loath to embarrass herself in front of the spellcaster. She cleared her throat quietly. And? What brings you here? Do you have work here, too? Yes, work. That's quite correct. A snicker. Her answer, like her laugh, seemed shrouded in smoke. Priestess wasn't sure if the spellcaster was teasing her, which produced a long pipe from somewhere or other with a wave of her hand and lit it with a murmur of inflammatory. A sweet aroma drifted from it, cloaked in the smell, which said, "Come on," and gave Spearman a tap on the elbow. Spearman continued to glare at Goblin Slayer, and after a moment, he gave one sharp click of his tongue. Listen up. Sheesh. I'm not your delivery boy, got it? You dragged me all the way out here to bring you this. He gave Goblin Slayer a hempen pouch with something stuffed inside it. It looked heavy. Goblin Slayer tucked it neatly into his bag. His helmet turned toward Spearman, and he said dispassionately, "Sorry. Thanks for the help. HRG. I asked you because you are the most easygoing and trustworthy adventurer I know. HRRGG. He. Which seemed quite unable to contain her laughter, and Spearman glared daggers at her. Naturally, which paid him no mind, and the stare got him nowhere. Need any more bodies? We might be able to help you out, for a reward, of course. No. We'll manage. Priestess looked at Witch and blushed slightly. Ever since their battle against the goblins, the two spellcasters seemed to have come to understand each other on some level. Anyway, ain't they got stuff like this around here? By local? I can't use the local variety. Was that embarrassment, or regret, or both? Goblin Slayer shook his head at Spearman's complaint. It isn't fine enough. Whatever you say. Spearman shrugged, doing his best to convey annoyance and disinterest simultaneously. What are you gonna use it for, anyway? I think you know. Priestess's smile deepened. Yes, of course. He always had just one thing in mind. True, that was what worried her sometimes, what made her unable to leave him alone. Goblin slaying. He was completely beyond help. Thus Priestess and Goblin Slayer parted ways with Spearman and Witch, finished their shopping, and headed back. The long summer day was edging toward twilight, the red evening sun casting long shadows. Even in exaggerated silhouette, Priestess only came up to his shoulders. She looked absently up at him, or the helmet that hid his expression. Will I ever catch up with him? The rank tag that dangled around her own neck was obsidian. The 9th rank. A long way from his silver, he was called Goblin Slayer, for goblins were all he ever fought. It had been months since she'd met him. There were some things she understood now, but there were others she didn't. And there were some things he'd taught her, and others he hadn't. Oh. Coming out of her reverie, she realized they had already reached their destination. The burble of water was quite loud now, and when she looked up, there was the Temple of Law, and 3 adventurers fully equipped. A smile spread across Priestess's face. In the evening sun, it looked like a rose blooming. Everyone. You made it back. You better believe we did. Sheesh, that was rough. High Elf Archer waved, looking tired but unconcerned. When we got back to the surface, you guys hadn't returned yet. So, naturally, we were just talking about whether to come meet you. Beside her, Dwarf Shaman stroked his white beard and slapped his protruding belly. Well, we had a few close calls. Let us regale you over dinner. Hold on, Dwarf. Talking about work at mealtime is not allowed. Not allowed? Oh, everything's not allowed with you. How do you expect to get a man like that? HRN. High Elf Archer demanded just what he meant by that, her ears lying flat. Dwarf Shaman, of course, had a comeback ready, and soon they were at it as usual. Gosh. It's always nice to see you two getting along so well. When they had first met, Priestess had tried to stop these arguments, but now she was used to them. Goblin Slayer glanced over at their lively banter but soon looked away. Tell me. What close calls did they involve goblins? I am afraid it is not a story best told while we stand here. Lizard Priest rumbled in his throat and slapped his tail against the ground. Let us hold council inside the temple. Well, in that case, Priestess broke in with an idea. She passed the bundle she was holding to Lizard Priest, who reached out to take it. It included her personal equipment, along with provisions for the entire party. They would all have to look it over together. I'll make dinner tonight. Let's all talk after that. I have no objection. My Lord Goblin Slayer. I don't mind, either, came the dispassionate answer. Priestess pursed her lips. This was the moment of truth. Okay, Goblin Slayer, sir. During dinner, you have to talk about something other than goblins. Har. 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 Lizard Priest's eyes rolled merrily in his head, and he touched his tongue to his nose. One must respect the requests of one's traveling companions. Come, you two, we're going in. High Elf Archer and Dwarf Shaman fell silent when he hissed at them, as ever. Lizard Priest ushered them rather bodily inside. Priestess made to follow them, but suddenly she realized that Goblin Slayer, next to her, had stopped where he was. In the long shadows cast by the crimson sun, he stood alone. He looked like a child whose friends had drifted home while he was caught up in his games. Priestess wasn't sure what brought the image to mind. Goblin Slayer, sir. Shall we go? Yes, he murmured when she called to him. Companions. He rolled the unfamiliar word around in his mouth. I suppose they are. Then Goblin Slayer and Priestess followed slowly after them, their companions.